Chapter 2. Heaven. My mother was waiting for me with open arms. I hadn't seen her since she had died when I was 16, and I had missed her every day of my life. Now, here she stood for me to hug and hold again. My angels let me see Belle as I remembered her from our life together. It took all the concentration she could muster to shape her soul fibers back into her old physical being, but she knew how necessary it was for me to have her there in a form I remembered. My wonderful, loving mom even managed to manifest her favorite house dress and hairdo just for me. Belle was crying to beat the band, she was so happy to see me. She hadn't been ready to leave me and my brother Irv so early, and she'd spent a lot of anxious moments in heaven aware of the mistakes we were making and how we were being wounded by life, all without being able to be there in person to help. I could see how it also comforted and healed her to be able to spend this time with me now. My mom was there to help me accept the reality of heaven so I didn't lose myself in a tailspin of disbelief. Seeing my mother as I'd known her and being held within the light of her soul right then meant the world to me. The reason familiar touchstones such as these help a soul so much at this point is because, quite honestly, dying is as disorienting as all get out. This process helps a soul release the memory of that cold, empty void that veils heaven from earth. We pass through the void on the way to and from the earth plane each time we incarnate and die. The darkness of that place holds the potential for and mystery of all of life. And life is born from it, but it is not the coziest place to hang out in, I can tell you. Not to mention the fact that it takes some time to get used to not having a body, which made me feel naked, raw, and abandoned. Being held in Belle's love felt much better, much safer, much more familiar. She held me in a soul embrace, a communion really, of our conscious senses of each other's being. I have never had such a warm, accepting welcome, not anywhere. Her warmth and kindness steadied me, preparing me to meet my angels and stand before my loving source. After we'd hugged for what felt like forever, my angels led us to a deli where we had coffee and bagels. Imagine what a shock that was! To realize I had traveled God knows how far from the only life I could remember, at least to that point, only to discover that even up in heaven, hell, even without a body, I could still get a cup of coffee and a bagel. Yes! The memory of all the times I'd shared food with my mother steadied me further. I began to feel enough like my old self to start laughing with and teasing her the way I used to. She'd always been so serious, so worried about my father, who'd been a terror to live with because of his mental illness. That kind of teasing had always been a way for us to comfort each other. I felt deeply grateful for her help as I began to face another difficult passage. After enjoying each other's company for a good while, my mom knew she'd done all she could to prepare me for the next step in my heavenly journey. She smiled warmly as she gave me over to the care of my angels. I can't decide the best way to introduce you to the presence of, hell, even the idea of angels. So let me just jump right in. Angels are points of radiant consciousness whose concentrated love and compassion enable them to take personal shape when they're in the presence of a newly arriving soul like mine. To call them gorgeous is a major understatement. Nothing in my belief system on earth had prepared me for the show-stopping glory of even one of these beings, let alone a host of them. Their faces held all the beauty of every race on earth, and they smiled at me with a compassionate wisdom that ran as deep as the roots of the tallest California redwood. Enveloped in their radiating compassion, I began the jarring transition of returning from mortal being back to pure soul. No sooner had I adjusted to this than I found myself instantly, mysteriously, standing before the Creator of all life. And to think, I once thought facing my accountant was tough. This point I cannot stress enough. There is no love and truth like this moment anywhere in the universe. I felt the pulse of the origin of life beating within and around me, holding me in a loving embrace that made me feel utterly accepted for being exactly as I was, as I am. The comfort of this acceptance moved me to pulse right along with the heartbeat of our loving source. What a moment of truth that was! What a glorious thing to be in the presence of such profound truth! Not only is there glory, there is also a reawakening of one's own eternal wisdom. Each soul that incarnates is given some degree of camouflage around its eternal knowledge, a sort of veil of forgetfulness, if you will. If you came to earth without it, your constant awareness of heaven's love and glory would all but prevent you from living your human life. It's a delicate balancing act that's no longer necessary once the body is gone. When this transition takes place, your consciousness shifts from your identification with your body to identification with your soul and the eternal truths of what it means to be a living soul in heaven and on earth. You then identify with these truths and begin understanding you have some healing, growing, and celebrating to do. Standing with my source in this throbbing cortex of crystalline light and pure sound, I could see the entire human race in all its tender craziness and heroic courage, all the way back to the very beginning. I could also see why there is a need for so many different religions on earth. The beauty of our loving source is so large and eternal that it takes a huge diversity of cultures and traditions to even come close to a full expression of the totality of our Creator. There is no one name, and there is no male or female to this immense entity. It is all things and all glory, and, most of all, it is love. In this love, I could also see the tragedy of how people have often taken the original word of this divine presence and twisted it to shape practices that help them avoid spiritual growth rather than walk through it or embrace it genuinely. Like when people believe it's okay to kill one another or persecute each other over religious differences, or when they use prayer and meditation as ways to avoid strong emotions, let alone using religious tenets to dominate and destroy women. But none of that dimmed the power of the beauty around me. Understand that, while I was alive as Saul Weinberg, I was a total skeptic about any notions of celestial beauty. Now, I know I can't convince any of you of the reality of this experience. It might even be impossible to imagine any of this until you die, cross over, and remember it all once you're brought back into this belongingness. But I have to give it a try because what I experienced next went beyond seeing visions or feeling love. It's not easy to describe since I don't have earthbound reference points to use for comparison, but I'm giving it a shot because it's the root of what I want to share with you. Okay, here goes. When the soul stands with the source of all life, there's an intimate connectedness so intense, it feels like a living definition of interconnectedness itself. I could barely hold on to my hat within this onrush of ecstatic interchange. Every pulse in my soul core shifted with the rhythm of color and melody around me. Each response I had to everything immediately affected my environment. I was sure I'd be broken by the intensity of intermingling with all this light and sound. There, with the source, I began to see things in an entirely different way. This profound communion showed me how so much of what I had been attached to on earth had never been the whole truth. As I settled into that realization, any final buffers left between me and the truth were removed. I was no longer capable of any forms of denial. All the reasons I'd ever used for choosing harsh or unloving behavior towards others or myself were suddenly meaningless. With that denial stripped away, everything boiled down to one thing: acceptance. There's a lot a soul has to discover about acceptance, not the least of which is accepting that you were on earth and you're now in heaven. There are also elements about remembering how you behaved in your last life that have to be worked through with incredible delicacy. That's partly why heavenly healing is unique to each individual. Mine was no exception. I had to be handled with kid gloves because it was too hard that early in my arrival for my soul to understand that I'd had a part in blocking help from heaven during my lifetime. It's one thing to see all the pain you ever experienced all at once. It's an even bigger shock to find out you had a part in keeping yourself in that pain. In my defense, my blocking of heaven's help was not a conscious act. Most of the blocks came from having been burned so badly by all the pain I suffered every day in both work and life. It wasn't bad enough that I had been engulfed by all that suffering. I now had to see my part in stopping any help. Without knowing it, I'd put up a wall that totally shut out the loving energy God constantly sent my way. Every time I had embraced anger or resentment, had been judgmental, or had felt there was no good way out of a dark place, I'd left no room for heaven to enter and help me. This is not to say my body, emotions, and needs on earth hadn't needed to be tended to and cared for while I was alive. They had. They had been sacred. But now that all the denial was stripped away, my focus moved from the memory of those earthly needs and emotions to the core elements that remained. And these had nothing to do with social position, resources, who I was or what I had or had not done. The light washing around and through me touched me with an understanding that life was really only about whether or not I had given and received love. Without the burden and blindness inherent in denial and mere survival, the first thing I became aware of was any harm I had caused others and whether or not I had attempted atonement or reconciliation. Following right on the heels of that was a crystal clear picture of all the times I'd allowed others to hurt me and the times I'd become lost in being treated as a victim. That was no picnic to relive, I can tell you. But my angels helped by offering a memory of love they hoped would help my consciousness open enough to move forward in my adjustment to heaven. They bathed me in a compassionate radiance, a kind of lilting melody that acknowledged all the acts of love I had engaged in every day on earth. That's the way conversation seems to work up here. You get information as the energy of that shared, pulsing love washes over you. Man, the purity and sweetness of that love are incredible. It felt to me like the culmination of every beautiful piece of music I'd ever heard on earth. Through this, I saw how every time I'd been kind to someone at the grocery store, or been generous to others either financially or emotionally, the fabric of love that holds us all together had been strengthened. Heaven showed me right then and there that this is how each of us serves as the living eyes and presence of God every single day of our lives. I knew in this moment with our Source that these are the core elements of life that truly matter. These fundamental acts and gestures revolve around giving and receiving love as a behavior, which is way deeper than feeling love while still being able to hurt others or allowing yourself to be wounded. Love is a behavior. It's something you feel in your heart and then live as a continual action. It is an action of respect for those around you, an action of loving them in a way that is easiest for them to receive it, rather than what's easiest for you to give. Your first experiences in heaven are all geared toward helping you remember this truth about love. Maybe an analogy will help you understand the way heaven communicates these lessons. The best one I can think of is a collage, some whole piece made up of a collection of images and themes. Take this idea and expand it into a collage made up of every religion's view of heaven. Then mix that up with every single person's view of heaven. Finally, mix in all the existing eternal truths about creation, love, sin, and salvation. That's heaven. But remember, when you first get here, all you can see is your own belief about what heaven should be like. You have to be here for a good while before you can see under the layers of your own learned bias to find the real heaven. It's pretty intense, actually, and the truth is, if you didn't have some kind of filter, especially when you first arrive, you would be overwhelmed by the kaleidoscope of color, sound, and form that goes on here. Your filter is made up of the life and belief systems you embraced during the lifetime you're just coming back from. My filter was the Jewish American culture. My new understanding of life and eternity soon softened these reference points. I then began my journey back to the full consciousness of eternal life. After Belle helped me adjust and I met with my Creator, I was taken on a tour of heaven. This was done to help me decide where I wanted to heal and serve. At this point, I'd adjusted enough to eternal grace to be able to see the landscape through multi-generational and multicultural eyes. Eternal eyes. Although what I'm sharing with you is colored by my own personal bias, please understand that though there is a great truth in what I'm saying, there is lots of room for the experiences of other souls and religions. There is no one person or culture who could ever adequately express the beauty and mystery of our loving Source's grace as it shines in heaven. In the face of it all, words are sketchy signposts at best, pointing awkwardly to larger truths that can be comprehended only by being lived through. Having said that, let me give you a sense of what I saw and felt on my tour. It was like riding on a boat through the streets of Venice, being shown all the different neighborhoods that make up that old historical city. I saw many, many neighborhoods in heaven, each dedicated to celebration and education in some diverse, unique way. It felt like I was floating past an eternal party, one where nobody was going to have a hangover since they were all drunk on love. I can't emphasize enough the intensity of the joy I saw on everyone's face. This joy is one of the universal, eternal facts of heaven. All souls see and feel this joy when they arrive, no matter what religious or cultural filter they are seeing it through. When I say I saw people or the faces of people, I mean each of the souls I encountered in heaven appeared to me in a form that is human-like. Their facial features are composites of all the lifetimes they'd lived. Whether a soul has lived only once or 1,000 times, all the eternal characteristics of that being are energetically shaped to create an image that is a kind of holographic representation of a human being, only far more radiant. The composite is neither young nor old. It just, for lack of a better word, is. I saw joyous children and joyous craftspeople. I was served coffee and cake by some of the happiest waiters you'll ever meet. I asked one of them, "How is it you came all the way to heaven and ended up as a waiter, yet you're so ridiculously happy?" He laughed and said to me, "I'm happy because I also have time to work on perfecting my sole purpose, which is forestry. Everybody chooses to do some service in heaven that helps keep the fabric of a neighborhood intact. This is my neighborhood service, and I love it. But I also get time in the woods each day to study the perfect archetypal form of trees and what keeps them healthy. I get time to help record that information in heavenly records. I also have the fun of communing with the angels who make my knowledge available to any earthly foresters who are open to inspiration as they enjoy the beauty of the trees and their care." "Sounds like heaven to me," I said. "But let me ask you one more thing. Doesn't all that work and creativity get a little lonely? Where does a person go for love and affection around here?" My new friend had a good laugh over that one. "You get right to the point, don't you?" "Well," he continued, "the truth is that one of the main joys of heaven is what we learn here about how to give and receive love in any relationship. Everyone is given an abundance of opportunities every day to start and maintain healthy, lasting, intimate relationships and friendships, sisterhoods and brotherhoods. That's the real heaven, man. All that communing and giving and receiving is beyond ecstatic. It really helps you prepare for the much harder test of giving and receiving love under the stresses of being down on earth." Well, that gave me something to chew on. As I continued my tour, I saw the truth of what he had told me everywhere I went. I saw joy, peace, and harmony in the souls gathered in stores, cafes, and galleries. I saw lovers holding hands, parents and children playing, and siblings and friends learning together. I did not see any emotional or physical violence. There was also no dominance or abuse of power. My angels explained that it's easy to live love in heaven, but the love we live here is only practice. I learned that our time on earth tests our eternal soul wisdom about how to behave with love even under the duress of physical fear and emotional suffering. Along with the celebration and perfection, I saw an abundance of diversity. Each neighborhood had its own distinct flavor and architecture. Some places were like the best of New Orleans. Others were perfect examples of rural Tuscany villages. Others still a Bedouin desert encampment. What each neighborhood had in common was a delightful near perfection of form and ambience. The buildings were at their most symmetrical. The food was beyond delicious. And every person did his or her job and got along with others with grace and humor. After taking in all this beauty, I had one of the most startling realizations I was ever to have in heaven, or on earth for that matter. I kept seeing pieces of heaven that looked so earthbound, I would have sworn I was back on the planet. Usually places in heaven have an aura of love and radiance that creates a transparent look. Some of the places I saw were surprisingly solid, less transparent, even though they retained that same aura of light and love. I asked my angels what this difference was about, and they told me that heaven is a very separate reality, while simultaneously being in and around each one of us on earth at all times. They told me there are places and moments in life that reach the perfection of the union between heaven and earth. Those moments embody the foundation of all creation and all being. We are slowly, achingly evolving toward every moment of life being like these perfect moments. On my tour, I was seeing the potential of perfection for earth that rests in heaven. Heaven holds the archetypes for all of this. The neighborhoods I was traveling through embodied them. My angels took me next to some neighborhoods where people went to heal from cruelty and tragedy. I was glad to see that souls really do heal in heaven. I had spent a lot of my time on earth worrying about the mess we humans seem to be in right now. I wanted to know what heaven was doing about that, especially what our loving source was doing to stop cruelty and suffering. Souls who did terrible harm to someone when they were alive, or who had been victims of destructive physical and emotional violence, were welcomed here with open arms. They were given respite in their homes and work, and given loving attention until they felt free of their suffering. Heaven always tries to help souls heal from the worst that life can bring on earth. I was encouraged to see that there are active, rigorous attempts to heal everyone in heaven who needs it. My soul was still smarting from surviving my father's emotional abuse. I was also still bruised in my core from the betrayals I'd suffered at the hand of those who tried to rob me blind in business dealings. I had an urgent interest to find out what would happen to those who'd harmed me and my loved ones. I didn't want suffering to continue. I didn't want to see anyone punished or hurt. I just wanted to see the perpetrators healed so they would stop hurting others. If I could witness this repair work in heaven, maybe I could learn how to teach this kind of progress on earth. What I saw was startling. It rearranged my buttons. I was taken to the dining hall of a lovely dormitory in a neighborhood that looked a lot like an upscale New Jersey suburb. Its campus was small, beautifully landscaped, and close to a downtown village where the souls being healed could shop, eat, and commune with other souls in that particular heavenly neighborhood. The large dining hall had many round tables adorned with elegant floral arrangements. One wall of the room was made up entirely of French doors leading out onto a lawn. It seems beauty is a key ingredient in anyone's heavenly healing process, and they sure had it in abundance right here. This environment was used by souls who needed it most. They had in front of them the hardest job of all, admitting to themselves they had done irreparable harm to a fellow human being. I was introduced to a man who had volunteered to share his experience with anyone who wanted to learn more about the roots of human cruelty as part of his atonement for the damage he'd inflicted while alive. He was dressed like any suburban guy on the weekend, a nice polo shirt, chinos, and deck shoes. He was a strong, intelligent man who'd clearly opened his heart in order to take in loads of wisdom since he'd crossed over. I'll never forget the agony on his face as he explained to me that the hardest healing for him had been watching the consequences of his hurtful actions continue on even after his death. Angels in heaven gave him regular, compassionate, but very honest reports of how his cruelty was still harming his neighbors and family members. He had to see and hear the details of how a man he cheated out of a large sum of money lost his business, his house, and then his wife. In his family, he had to witness his oldest daughter struggle with substance abuse as she tried to heal from his sexual abuse when she was a teenager. He had to watch his grandson slide slowly into substance abuse too, because his mother's pain had left her unable to care for him the way he needed. And he had to watch all this without the help of denial or alcohol, without blockages like hatred and pain. Here, he was fully aware of his responsibility in causing this pain and saw he could have prevented it all by being more loving and kind. His task in this atonement was to continue forgiving himself. Yes, forgiving himself for his actions. His task was also to help search for and coordinate any angels available to send his loved ones and neighbors any extra help in the form of loans, therapy, new jobs, or kindness that they might be at all open to in their suffering. He had to spend hours beaming on their souls, praying they'd open their hearts and minds to this help, even though he knew they suffered from the same anger and denial that had kept him from receiving heavenly help. Worst of all, he had to do this with their pain reverberating through his soul every moment they suffered. The hardest realization for this soul was seeing that he'd chosen to incarnate this time to help the people he'd harmed in other lifetimes. But his own pain, fear, and lack of self-love had driven him to sin again and again. Because he had failed in his atonement, he would now have to stay in heaven without the option of incarnating on earth again until every last consequence he had set in motion on earth was finished for generations to come. It could take eons to erase that level of pain from the planet. Eons! I couldn't begin to imagine having the joy and beauty of living on Earth taken away. No breathing? No chocolate? No sex? No music or sun-washed evening lawns? No touching, holding, and talking to loved ones again? Not for lifetimes. I couldn't fathom the horror of that. Life is brutal and rough, but without the beauty of life on earth, all the bliss and joy you know in heaven gets to feel pretty surreal, maybe even a little empty. Without being able to return to earth to express and continually reflect love and glory back to God while in human form, all that wonder literally backs up in your soul, and it hurts. Imagine going a century without having a good bowel movement, even though you eat well every day, and you'll start to understand the kind of pain I'm talking about. As the tour continued, I saw that this healing technique was also used for any souls who had chosen to be born for only one lifetime. If they enacted destruction during their only incarnation, they, like the fellow I just saw, must feel the reverberation caused by their victim's pain and that of their children and grandchildren on through the generations until the consequences of their actions are cleansed from the earth. During this time, they must also put aside their own soul development in order to beam love and help onto the relations of their victims until they are all safe and secure again. This was very comforting to me. Seeing the divinity and humanity of the man before me in this cozy neighborhood, even under the burden of his sin, I felt love and compassion for him. It didn't matter that he was so much like the people who had caused me and my family the worst harm. I wanted this man to heal. I wanted him to love and forgive himself, and I wanted him never again to be capable of harming himself or anyone else. I wanted this for him because seeing the heavenly neighborhoods I passed through and the love I experienced within the embrace of my Creator had completely altered the way I now looked at everything. I was remembering that all the structures of society and daily life are in place to help us live love toward each other in daily, active behaviors of kindness. To put it simply, we take mortal form to celebrate the miracle of loving one another because in order to love in the fullest way, we need eyes and voices and arms and hearts to do it with. And all of life on earth is geared towards supporting our bodies in order to express this love most fully. But even as I felt compassion for this fellow, and for all the souls who had strayed from love in their lives and their choices, I started wondering about evil. I wondered if it existed on its own, as real an entity as all the love I was immersed in here in heaven. Even though my body was gone, the memory of feeling something I had at the time called evil was not. While alive, I had believed there was evil in the world. Now that I had seen so much about love on this celestial journey, I was eager to know more about the force I'd always thought of as the polar opposite of love. One of my angels told me, "Saul, you need to be aware of the fact that every action you or anyone else takes goes into the fiber of the soul. Over a long period of time, then, all you do literally becomes who your eternal self is. Another angel picked up the subject. There are some people who do so many bad things over such a long period of time in one life, or in many, that the momentum of their destructive behavior takes on a force of its own. It creates a life force that becomes stronger than the living intention in that person's soul. We here in heaven witness this. We see the person's soul caged in this destructive behavior, crying in agony to be set free. We see the person's rejection of any attempts at help and rehabilitation. These people become one with the force of evil. On a large scale, such as Hitler's attempt to wipe out the Jewish people, or on a small scale, such as with an unrepentant parent who keeps abusing a child despite the best therapy available, evil does exist. When it exists in individuals, it can congeal into group evil at any time, such as when the white settlers decimated the Native Americans in the pioneer days of the United States. I took in what they were saying, and it rang true given all I had seen so far on my tour. It made sense that evil would not always be easy to name or read. They showed me one of the most insidious examples on Earth that's plaguing the planet right now, especially in America. It's found in many middle-class homes that, on the surface, look pretty and loving to society from the outside. Viewing it from here, I could clearly see how, underneath that veneer, on a soul level, there is a deliberate denial of the needs of the human hearts inside those pretty walls. In that toxic, artificial environment, no souls are being nourished. It's as if this particular slice of society is focused solely on serving the needs of the flesh. Plenty of toys, plenty of food, creature comforts, and good education. But there is no attention paid to the truest needs of the heart and soul. The elements of living that for centuries made up the spiritual rituals of indigenous peoples, things like grace, the mystery of life, living with respect for the self and honoring the proper place of all life on the planet, have disappeared from child rearing. What a terrible negation of reality. From heaven, it looks as if a huge segment of people on Earth suddenly decided that no one would die from getting hit by a car, so they let their children play in traffic. Because this level of active denial goes on all over the planet these days, heaven has decided any soul crossing over who's done extreme harm in his or her life will be surrounded by love and compassion, given a kind of etheric time-out, if you will, until the consequences of their actions no longer reverberate anywhere on earth or in heaven. No matter how much these individuals might want to atone, to take on a task of service or to return to earth to try again, they are required to stay held safely in living radiance until all the consequences of their destructive actions have been completely healed. Needless to say, with some folks, this could take forever. But that's exactly what needs to be done, because once the momentum of evil in your life has started, the road to recovery isn't easy. Heaven can help you transform at any moment. That is definitely true. But it's a long journey back. Now, we all know that brutality, harsh realities, evil and random error permeate every day of our lives on Earth. They all make the love concept seem like a crazy joke by comparison. After all, it was the harshness of life that had caused so much misery in my life that I chose to die early just to get away from the pain. But now I was about to learn how love transcends these forces and how my sole purpose, the very defining, deepest desire we bring to earth each time we incarnate, could still be accomplished even though I'd cut my latest lifetime short. My angels thought the best way to illustrate this was to show me 4 chapters, 4 of my many past lives from my eternal love story with Irene. Now, you may or may not believe in past lives. What belief system you have is less important here than the basic truths I'm hoping our history will illustrate. Rather than trying to convince you of a certain way to look at things, I'm hoping you will be willing to consider that there really is something eternal at work here. I don't want to define it for you. I just want you to keep an open mind as you read, to remember times in your life when you had a knowing about the rightness of things going on around you, and how you trusted that knowing, even if you couldn't explain why. Irene's a great example of a person with that sort of intense knowing. You'll see later on in this story the way she always knew and trusted that there was something more to our love, something larger, something intended to impact on others than either of us could have comprehended while I was alive. If you don't see eye to eye with the reality of these stories, then maybe you can just see it as a good love story. The events making up the fabric of Irene's and my love for each other hold an eternal truth that was so powerful, it motivated me to reach her across the divide between heaven and earth. Whatever else you might get from reading about our passions, tragedies, and comedies, I hope most of all that you will see the bottom line truth. The love you give and receive in your life now can and does go on. The love you managed to stumble through for your parents, your neighbors, your children, or your spouse, no matter how imperfect, can help stop the force of cruelty in the world and can help you overcome any tragedy life hands you. I have to admit it took me a minute to grasp this concept of living more lifetimes than the one I'd just left. Once I did, though, the memories became more than mere fleeting thoughts. The first impressions of a lifetime Irene and I had shared a few centuries back came to me in a full-color, 3-dimensional, movie-like panorama. My angels said they started me off with this memory to remind me why I'd decided to take on this last incarnation in America. My love for Irene and my desire to help others. So stay tuned for the beginning of our eternal love story as my angels led me through it. But first, here's how Irene learned about my death, was able to find and communicate with me, and identified our joint soul purpose.